Hi, I'm Chris McBrien, a Gen Xer, and the pop culture from my generation is awesome.
And I'm Yancy Eaton, a millennial, and the pop culture from my generation is dope.
Episode 37, Jaws Movie Review. Hey, Chris McBrien here, along with Yancy Eaton, as always. Yancy, before we get into things this week, have you noticed there's been this thing going around on Facebook lately? I know you're not as into Facebook as you used to be, but there's this thing going around where everyone's posting like 9 bands I've seen, and one is a lie. Have you seen this thing?
I have seen this, yes.
It's like, it's completely taken over my timeline. Have you been involved in this in any way?
I have not. I saw a couple pieces of it. Whenever I hop on Facebook, my relationship is very, very minimal. Where we have a private, Facebook page with just or Facebook group with just my family, and I just go in there to see pictures of my nieces and nephews, and then get the hell off. So I don't really, dabble too much. But in the few minutes that I was on it this week, I did see multiple postings of this exact same thing over and over again.
I went ahead and posted my own version of it. So what I did was I posted and I said only one of these bands I have seen in concert. Any guesses as to which one it is? And it's like Nickelback, Triumph.
Oh God!
As you probably may know about me, I do not like Nickelback. So.
Well, good for you.
And I'm Canadian.
I don't either.
And people are like, hey, man, they're Canadian, man. I don't understand what the hate is. The thing is, the only way that you could get me to a Nickelback concert is with a wheelbarrow, a roll of duct tape, and an ether rag. And everyone knows how much I love Fonzie.
I don't know if you've seen any of the Sharknado movies.
Shatner and Takei are going to be there.
I cannot believe that this is actually possible.
The Star Wars prequels were awful.
Young Doctors in Love.
Young Doctors in Love. Bad CGI kind of starts and ends with George Lucas.
Some of the worst CGI I have ever seen in my entire life.
He ruined the whole original trilogy by superimposing Hayden Christensen over Sebastian Shaw at the end of Jedi. So this week we're reviewing a film, one of my favorite movies of all time. One of the top movies that I've ever seen in my entire life. It means a lot to me. It's obviously a Gen X film. It's a big one. It's Jaws. So I've sort of thrown the gauntlet down and had you go and watch it. Did you watch it twice this week? Is that right?
I did watch it twice this week, yes. I watched it, I think, Saturday after we'd recorded on Friday, and then I watched it just again yesterday. So pretty fresh in my mind.
So very, very fresh in your mind, too. It's like I say, it's an important movie for me. So going back a little bit, set things up. I first saw this movie when I was 7 years old, and I was at the drive-in. So I convinced my mom to take me to go see this movie. The movie had been out for 2 years already. It was 1977, and it was playing at the drive-in. And I was like, Mom, you got to take me to this movie. And she's like, I really don't think that's a good idea, son. It's a scary movie, and blah, blah, blah. And I don't think you're going to like it, and all this. No, Mom, I'm mature, I can watch these movies. I don't get scared, that, blah, blah, blah. And so I convinced her that she would take me. So she took me, to see the movie. And it scared the living daylights out of me. Oh, God, yeah. It was just craziness. So, yeah. I remember being in there, and we'll talk about some of the scenes later. There's a few gotcha moments in the movie, but oh, man, was I scared. Made it through about halfway through the movie, and then I was like, okay, Mom, I'm really, really scared, and I want to go home. So anyway, so you watched it this week twice, so it's very, very fresh in your mind as a millennial. Who is not emotionally attached to this film as a child like I was, that scared the pants off me, but made me really appreciate movies. Oh, huge. We'll get into that. But how does the movie hold up?
How does it hold up for me?
Yes.
Okay, so...
And for your generation.
We've talked about this in the past, where it's difficult to be critical about something and be objective about it and state things that you might think are little flaws or have, slight critiques or criticisms, and make it sound like you still also like the movie. I do enjoy this movie very, very much. I think it's, one of the first, real blockbusters, one of the first actual, perfect summer movies. This came out 4th of July weekend, which, in hindsight, it would have been nice if we timed this where it kind of correlated with that holiday. It would have been perfect, but, it's fine. But I liked it a lot, and I can see where the reverence comes from, towards this film. there were just certain aspects that I had a really difficult time overcoming, mainly like the animatronic part of the actual shark itself. I think 70% of the movie is absolutely perfect. The first and second act, I have no qualms with it whatsoever. I thought it was well executed, well shot. The acting was perfect. The casting was perfect. The score, John Williams' score, just adds so much to it. I literally had zero complaints for the entire, first chunk of the movie. The complaints with the actual shark itself is only because I'm coming at this as somebody who has driven a Corvette, and I'm kind of being shown like the Ford Model T. So it's kind of hard for me to have that same, awe and amazement that maybe somebody like you had whenever you first saw it. Whenever I've seen different iterations of animatronics and CGI and special effects. You see what I'm saying? So it's like I appreciate that it was groundbreaking at the time, but it's hard for me to be genuinely amazed at what they were able to do just because I've experienced so much after that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going to flip things around on you, and I'm going to totally disagree with you. I think that it goes the other way. I think that this movie is the Corvette, and the movies from your generation are like Yugos compared to it. Because here's the thing. I know you're used to watching CGI, right? And so your problem, and you make a good point, your problem is in the third act when you finally get to see the shark, right? And you're like, hey, it's a great big rubber shark. And so I have problems with this, right? But if it was, they've done CGI sharks in the movies before, something like Deep Blue Sea, it was terrible, right?
It was awful.
So I guess you could throw that up there. But here's the thing: if number one, as you know, right from episode 2 of this podcast, I have been saying, I don't like CGI. I like the old school animatronics and all that stuff. And it just looks better. It looks real. It actually occupies space with the actors. It just seems to work a lot better. So for that reason, I'm going to say that I liked, Jaws better as a non-CGI thing. But here's the main reason why it's better as a non-CGI thing. If this movie had been made today with CGI, the opening sequence when Chrissy Watkins goes out into the water and swims, right? Played by Susan Backlady, and she swims out there and she gets attacked at night.
Very lovely, by the way. Very lovely woman.
Yep. So she goes out there and she gets attacked by the shark at the opening scene. The way that Spielberg wanted to film that scene was to have the shark come right out of the water. He wanted it to be immediately, you're in the theater and all of a sudden, wham, you see this huge thing. He wanted to make a monster movie, right? But the problem is that this great big 25, and they had 3 sharks, by the way, but they had a left one, a right one, and a full one, but none of them worked, right? They couldn't get these things to work, especially when they built these things on these big kind of like rocker arms, and then, okay, they gotta get it to work, but then let's take it out and put it out into the salt water. It didn't work so good, right? So, but the thing was, because the shark didn't work, they couldn't do that. Okay, we can't do that scene. Okay, now what are we going to do? Okay, now the other one too, and I thought this was interesting. Just last week, Michael Salfino. I don't know if you know Michael on Twitter. He's a fantasy baseball guy.
Yep, I know Mike.
He's a great guy. He sent out a tweet, and I just thought it was such an interesting thread of tweets about movies, and he was talking about Jaws. And he brought up a really good point that in the scene where Brody's on the beach and sees the Kittner boy get attacked, he's supposed to see a lot more than what you see in the movie. The shark, again, is supposed to come right out of the water. He has to see it attack this kid. And they couldn't get the shark to work. So he didn't get to see that either. So it's well over halfway through the movie before you finally see the shark. And so the fact which is perfect, which again, that's not the way they planned it. But because you couldn't see it, of course, what's more terrifying than your imagination? Nothing, right? So the fact that you can't see anything and all you hear is John Williams, EF 2-note score, it scares the daylights out of people. And that's what made it so good. So if there was CGI, this movie would just be another run-of-the-mill movie that you go to see, and after 2 weeks, it's out of theaters, and you forget all about it, and you're on to the next one. But I think that the fact that it's non-CGI is what makes it so fantastic for so many different reasons.
I do agree with what you're saying, but I don't necessarily mean that it's better because, or it would have been better because of CGI. Animatronics in itself is much better today. I mean, look at some of the Lord of the Rings films. You see what I'm saying? Where those look like real things. It doesn't necessarily have to be CGI to enhance it, but like I said, it in the end, it is an inflatable rubber shark, and that was kind of something that I had a really difficult time reconciling, was just the actual shark itself. But like you said, by chance or happenstance or what have you, we didn't see the shark for a vast majority of the film, which enhanced it, which I actually really liked. The biggest thing with me with this film, Chris, is I'm not one who has ever been a fan of like the whole creature feature type film where it's just about like whatever X type of monster with these X type of features. That doesn't appeal to me at all. I like the fact that there's a difference between surprise and suspense. And this movie isn't about a surprise, gotcha, things pop out of the water, something comes out from behind, that does nothing for me. The emotional and like the hidden suspense that you get from this is just, it builds up through the first half of the film. And like I said, I almost wish they would have even pushed it further and further and further to where maybe we didn't have a reveal of the creature until the very end. But I mean, I'm talking about this a lot, but it's a minor issue with it. Like I said, it's not like it ruins the film or anything for me, but I think the first act of the film is so much stronger than the second half. And would you say you agree with that? Would you put the first half, when you haven't seen the shark yet, above the second act, or what are your thoughts on that?
I do, and it works in a couple of different ways. Number one, as you said, and as I mentioned earlier, the suspense. You don't see anything, you just hear the sound, the soundtrack, or the score rather, and so for that reason, it works better too. So I think there's the suspense thing. The other thing is that when you finally do see the shark, it's okay. So here's the thing. There's a few you mentioned about gotcha moments. You said, there's not a lot. It's not really like, jump out of the shadows, scary parts in the movie. And you're right. But there are a few gotcha moments in the movie. And, one of them, the one that everyone always goes to is Ben Gardner's boat. When Ben Gardner comes out of the boat, right? When his corpse comes out, and it's a big scary moment. But for me, the creepiest scene in this movie is remember when the shark, the guys, the Boy Scouts are in the pond and they're doing like their 1 mile swim or whatever it is. And the shark goes into the pond. And it's halfway through the movie. You haven't seen the shark yet. And then all of a sudden, there's the guy that's like the scout leader. And he's like rowing his boat. Hey, you guys okay over there? Is everything going okay? And all of a sudden, the shark comes up. And you see the fin, and it just hits his boat. He's in a little rowboat, and the rowboat goes over. So then he's scrambling to try and get up onto the boat. And as he is, the shark, you finally see it under the water, and it's coming in sideways at him, really slow. That, to me, is the creepiest scene in the entire movie. The creepiest scene.
Really?
It creeped me out because you hadn't seen the shark yet, and then finally you see it, and you're like, holy smokes, and it's huge, and it's coming in sideways really slow with its mouth open. It's just, to me, that was so it was just so creepy. And then, of course, the scene right after that, it bites the guy, and then, as you remember, the leg falls down, and when they show his severed leg when it hits the bottom of the ocean floor, that was the exact moment when I turned to my mom in the drive-in and said, Mom, I want to go home. I was so scared. That leg, when I saw that leg, I was like, oh my God, I got to go home.
And what's so wild about that scene too, and actually most of the shark scenes in this film, is they take place during the day. Obviously, people are going to go out to the beach and go swimming and stuff during the day. So it makes sense that that's whenever you would see it. But like to make something that suspenseful and that terrifying, at noon, you know what I mean? Like a lot of times, like one of the main tropes that all these, present day horror films use is it's dark and the unknown, the abyss. You can't physically see what's out there. So there's that unknown factor that kind of adds to the tension. You know what I mean? Just being in a dark room by yourself, terrifies some people. So you don't even need a monster. But like to do it in the afternoon like that with literally hundreds of people around, some people find comfort in being surrounded by like a large group of people. And the fact that like there's this like monster who's almost disguised by the fact that there are so many people. So, one lifeguard can't possibly watch, an entire Boy Scout troop, or, he can't comb the entire beach and make sure that every single person is accounted for at all times, So it's kind of like that. It's playing on that fear of like, if I'm in a stadium and I have a heart attack, watching a football game, I'm less likely to be spotted as if, I was the only person standing on the field. You see what I'm saying? It's kind of like it's playing onto that, like that being like a huge mob of people, and, there being a predator amongst these hundreds and hundreds of people swimming in the water. It's just, I think that's like an interesting play on it too, like I said, and just how to do it in broad daylight like that. I think it's interesting, not to jump around, but I think it's interesting how you talked about that one particular scene being the most like suspenseful and terrifying to you. I mean, just the one scene where it shows like the woman swimming, and it shows like her legs kicking back and forth, and it's kind of dark, but you can still make out her body and stuff. I thought that was the single most like iconic and effective scene in the entire film, and I wish there was more of that. And I don't know how you feel about that. Like, do you think if there were more scenes similar to that, the actual water scenes itself, would it have added to it? Or do you think it would have kind of lessened the effect as the film went on if they kept using it over and over again?
No, I think that they did actually use it to good effect. One of the things that they did in this movie was Spielberg wanted to be right at the eye level of the water. So, because when you go into the water, you're right at eye level, right? And so he wanted to get down right at eye level to shoot some of the scenes. Well,
I didn't think about that, but yeah,
well, it's 1975. They don't have anything that can do that. that. They don't have a camera that you can put in the water. It just doesn't exist. So he had to invent one. So they had to invent this thing that would basically go around the camera and allow it to be, because if you'll notice, there's scenes where the water's lapping up. And you can kind of almost see under the water for a second and then up again. And so they had to invent that stuff. And that's what makes it so cool. And, going back to what you made a really good point, I thought, about it being the first blockbuster ever. And it really was. It was the first blockbuster. You got to realize, 1975, this movie was released on June the 20th, 1975. It was originally scheduled to be released at Christmas time. But because the way they went so over schedule in shooting the movie and then editing this sucker, that it wasn't ready to go for Christmas. And so then, we got to push it off and come out in the summer. Oh, well, that kind of sucks, because at the time, movies that came out in the summer, that was sort of reserved for like low-end movies. All the low-end movies came out in the summer. And all of a sudden, Jaws was released in the summer. It became a blockbuster. Literally, people lined up around the block to go see it. So it was the very first blockbuster of all time. It quickly became the highest grossing film of all time. Didn't last.
I don't mean to denigrate the film and make it sound like they just lucked into having a blockbuster like this, but it is weird how circumstance kind of dictated how a lot of things went with this film.
Absolutely.
With filming and the release date and stuff like that. And it actually was just a perfect storm. You know what I mean? Like,
It was. You're totally just going back to what I said before. The shark. If the shark would have worked, this would have been a monster movie that we would have fit in with all the other monster and disaster movies of the 70s. The Poseidon Adventure and, Planet of the Apes and all this stuff that came out in the 70s. It would have been just another one and it would be gone again. But you're right. The fact that the shark didn't work, that played into the suspense of the film. The fact that it came out in the summertime. Guess when everyone's going to the beach? In the summertime. Yep. It's just, you're right. There was a lot of circumstantial, like most good things in life, that are incredibly successful. There's a lot of luck involved. A lot of skill. But there's a lot of luck involved too. And you're going back to the CGI thing. Like, if you think about it, like the budget of this movie, the original budget of this movie was $3.5 million. It wound up costing about $8 million because they went over budget. That is an equivalent to about $35 million today. Mm-hmm. Just compare that. Pirates of the Caribbean cost $342 million to make. Titanic was $295 million to make. This movie cost $35, comparatively. And it's equally as effective, if not more effective, than movies with all these CGI things. There was a couple scenes where they could have used the CGI when they were shooting it. So, for example, they shot the movie in Martha's Vineyard. You're probably aware of that, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so they wanted Spielberg liked Martha's Vineyard because it was one of the few places where they could go out about a mile or 2 miles offshore, and it was still 20 feet deep and a sandy bottom. So it was perfect for them to rig up this shark out there. So that was one thing. And the other thing was, when you were out there, 2 miles out, no matter what direction you looked in, you couldn't see land. It was water. And he wanted to give those scenes the feeling, he wanted to give the audience the feeling these guys are out in the middle of nowhere. And they're completely isolated. Because if you could see land in the background, you'd be like, hey, the shark's attacking your boat. Just drive into the shore. You know what I mean? Like, just go get away. You couldn't get away. That was the whole idea of the scene. Problem is, they're out there, they're shooting, and all of a sudden, think about this, Yancy, 1974 when they're shooting it, right? And they want to give the impression of isolation. All of a sudden, in the distance, you see a sailboat. Well, what do? You have to wait until that sailboat is gone and out of the shot. So you have to wait, a half an hour to an hour because it's so far away for it to move across the horizon. By then, lighting
is different. The sunlight's different. The tides may have switched. Like, there's a lot to take into account for that. Yeah.
Or worse, as soon as it gets out of the shot, you start filming and another sailboat comes along. Oh, damn. And this happened continuously. Nowadays, you just CGI, you just digitally remove it, right? It wouldn't matter. So they're being shot off of Martha's Vineyard. I think there was like a regatta or something like that going on down in New York area. So all these boats were all headed down there. So there was just boat after boat after boat. They couldn't shoot anything. And then when they finally would get the cameras rolling and say, okay, now we can shoot, the shark's not working. So it's just like, what are we doing here? This is crazy, Mm-hmm. But, so some other things that I wanted to touch base on. I mentioned Martha's Vineyard. That was really cool. So the book, I don't know if you've ever read the book. I have not, Chris. Okay, no, so in the book, the interesting thing in the book was there was a romance between Hooper and Ellen Brody in the book, and it's quite a big part of the book too. And they obviously left that out of the movie. The other thing I thought was interesting was Peter Benchley's actually in the movie. He does a cameo in the film. And remember the scene where the reporter is on the beach and he's looking at the camera and he's saying, he's talking about the beaches, possibly being closed and blah, 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 this and that, but now they've reopened. Right. That's Peter Benchley. So he's the guy that wrote the book, obviously.
I did not know that. I never would have got that.
Yeah, I love Jaws trivia. I love it.
Let me ask you this real quick. Yeah. Let me ask you this. So do you have any particular quotes that stay with you in this movie, or like particular scenes that you hold on to?
Well, like I say, the scene with the leg that falls to the bottom of the ocean floor, because when I was 7 years old, that's when I turned to my mom and said, I want to go home. So that always scared me. I think Ben Gardner, his head coming out of the boat, is one of the greatest gotcha moments in motion picture history. I really do. It's just, it just blows your mind away when you see that. Obviously, the line, we're going to need a bigger boat, which was completely improvised by Roy Scheider, by the way. That was not in the script. He improvised it and they left it in because it was such a great... That's become iconic. That's become a catchphrase in the zeitgeist of pop culture, or even just in the world, just in general, of, meaning, hey, we're in trouble, we're going to need more help, sort of thing. It's just a perfect catchphrase. So, I mean, that's the one that kind of stands out for me. What about you, as a millennial?
What's really weird about this film is, like, it's about a shark, but it's actually not about the shark at all, which I liked. They did a really good job of making me emotionally invested in the characters, and some of my favorite scenes had absolutely nothing to do with the shark or trying to find the shark or anything at all. Like the scene where they're sitting there with the father and the son at the dinner table, and they're just kind of like, I don't know, like playing with each other, like back and forth and making faces and stuff.
Faces, yep.
It has nothing to do with the outcome of the film. There's zero stakes involved with that, and yet I still really cared about it, and it made me emotionally invested in him as a character.
Yeah, it wasn't even in the script. So he actually did that off camera. He was doing it with the kid. He was playing with the kid, and Spielberg saw him doing it, and he goes, "I like that. Let's set up. Let's do that."
Yeah,
do it again. And they did. And you're right. It just made that. And the scene where you see Ellen Brody looking at him and she gets caught up in it. And speaking of Ellen Brody and even the other characters, what did you think of the choice of the actors in this? Like, it's just perfect. I think each of them, it's just perfect.
I do think it's perfect. I think everybody was cast very well. I think if I had to rank them, I think Robert Shaw, while it was a good performance, it was probably my least favorite, just because like the kooky, ornery, like backwards old, sea captain kind of thing. I don't know. That doesn't really appeal to me. Like, it feels almost like a caricature. And I know you're seeing this and like your jaw is dropping, but he was probably my least favorite. The Richard Dreyfuss's character, I forgot his name offhand, but I wish he would have had more lines in the film, to be honest with you. I wish they would have kind of featured him a little bit more, but I thought his parts were particularly strong. But I'm just looking through my notes. There was a couple of things I wanted to touch on real quick. What did you think about how he used...
I want to come back to Robert Shaw here for a second, because I think Robert Shaw was absolutely brilliant. And the funny thing was, as always, in most movies, he wasn't the first choice to play the role. So originally Spielberg wanted Lee Marvin to play it. Lee Marvin said, no, I don't want to do it. And then he wanted Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden wasn't available. He couldn't do it. So the producers, Richard D. Zanuck and David Brown, they had worked with Robert Shaw on The Sting in 1973, and they were like, hey, we got this guy. Like, I think he's pretty good. And so he came on. Hell of a pain in the ass to work with, because for whatever reason, Robert Shaw was, I think he drank a bit, but he was also this unbelievably competitive human being, like unnaturally competitive, just so competitive for no reason at all. He was competitive in and some of those scenes you see with him and Hooper, where he's kind of pulling at Hooper and he's kind of, bugging him, and then Hooper's like, hey, I don't want to take this abuse much longer, and all that. A lot of that was very, very real, because Robert Shaw was just such a pain in the butt. I thought Shaw was brilliant in that. In the scene when he gives his speech about the Indianapolis, and when he says, I was on the Indianapolis. So that was originally written, that speech was originally written by someone called Howard Sackler, wrote this. And then they wanted to rewrite it. So then Spielberg rewrote it. And then Shaw took a look at it and said, you know what? Let me take a shot at this too. I want to rewrite it. So it's basically Robert Shaw rewrote Spielberg, who rewrote Sackler, and the final speech that you hear is the one that Robert Shaw wrote. So he wrote that. Oh, I thought he was brilliant. I thought he was fantastic. So I guess I understand what you're saying. He's a bit of a caricature, but I don't know, man. To me, I thought he was great. And Richard Dreyfuss was absolutely fantastic. I think it was funny because I look back on the 70s and I think of Richard Dreyfuss as being one of the most iconic actors of that decade. When you look at things like Jaws and Close Encounters and The Goodbye Girl. And, he was just fantastic in that movie. He was just great. And he wasn't even the first choice either. I mean, Spielberg wanted John Voight. He was looking at Timothy Bottoms, or even Jeff Bridges almost got it. None of them would commit to the movie.
John Voight.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. None of those guys would commit. And at the time, Richard Dreyfuss had just finished a movie up here in Canada, and it was called The Apprenticeship of Duddy Kravitz. And he went and sat in the movie theater and he watched it. And he's like, you know what? I better find another job real fast or I'm never going to work again. And he went back to Spielberg and basically begged him and said, please let me do this. And everyone else was turning him down. So Spielberg said, oh, what the heck, we'll bring him in. Because one of the things that Spielberg liked about him was he loved him in his buddy George Lucas's movie, American Graffiti. So he's like, okay, you got the part. And obviously did a good job. And Roy Scheider was just at a party. He was at a Hollywood party with his agent, and he overheard them talking about this movie. And he walked over to Spielberg and he said, how about me? Why not me? And Spielberg obviously had liked him from The French Connection, so he got cast. I think casting was brilliant. He liked Elaine Gary for Ellen Brody because her style was so improvisational. You know, she's just this improvisational actress. I think the cast is brilliant, but I'm surprised that you didn't like Shaw. Anyway,
no.
So back to
don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It wasn't that I didn't like him. It's just like I said, out of the main characters in the film, if I had to kind of rank them, I think he would have been towards the bottom for me. It didn't do as much nearly for me, but like I still thought he was effective. I still thought he did a fantastic job. And like just the other actors that you were mentioning, if I had to supplant his role with them, it just feels really weird and unnatural, like it wouldn't belong. But I think he did a fantastic job. It's just that particular character, either in this movie or in other movies, that kind of, you know what I mean, like that like offbeat kind of like loner type thing, it's never personally appealed to me. I could have done with less dialogue from him and more from Dreyfuss's character, but like I said, we're nitpicking here. I'm finding things to speak on, and it doesn't necessarily mean that like it ruined the film for me or anything like that. And it's so
funny because you got Spielberg, who now is like, the god of all director gods in the world.
He's pretty good. Yeah.
And not bad. And at the time he was a nobody. Like he had directed one feature film and one made for TV movie before he did this. He had directed a feature film called The Sugarland Express with the same two producers, Zanuck and Brown, and he did a TV movie called Duel about this big 18-wheeler that chases this guy played by Dennis Weaver. And that's one of the reasons why he got the movie, was because they were having trouble finding a director, because I think most directors read the script and saw right away, you're going to have a shark come out of the water and crash into a boat and eat a guy. I don't want to, this is going to be a bitch to shoot. I don't want to do this movie, and so they got Spielberg because Duel was basically just like Jaws, about this, this lone creature, in this case a truck, that's chasing somebody around. They're like, it's kind of the same movie, so let's get him on. And I mean, they originally, it was scheduled to be a 65-day shoot. And it took 159 days to shoot. I don't know how he didn't get fired. I have no idea. I have no idea how that he didn't get fired from doing this movie. And thank goodness he didn't, obviously. So I wanted to ask you a trivia question about this movie.
Okay, sure.
Because, all the bloody shark attacks that are in it and everything like that. Think about it, today's environment, and think about back then when it's released in 1975. Any guesses as to what its rating was?
What its rating was?
Yeah, its rating. It's how movies are rated G, PG, R.
Well, I mean, it shows like severed body parts and stuff. So, I mean, I assume it would be like a PG-13.
The PG-13 did not exist back then. Believe it or not. But we'll get a piece of trivia. PG-13 actually came about because of Spielberg years later when he did the second Raiders of the Lost Ark movie, when he did Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, because the Motion Picture Association of America, they ended up changing the rating system because of that movie, because they were like, it's too intense for a PG. It's too intense, but it's not quite an R. What do we get? So they came out with PG-13 for that movie. But back in 1975, when this movie came out, believe it or not, the movie was rated PG.
Really?
Yep. It was actually originally rated R. It was originally rated R. And it was funny, you talk about the severed part. It was that severed leg scene was a little bit more intense. And they went back and they just recut it to just have it just come down once, and then you didn't see anything else, and it changed the rating. So it made it a PG. But yeah, it was a PG movie. Hard to believe Jaws is PG, but crazy. A couple other things I want to mention about the movie. So Hooper, you mentioned some of the characters. Hooper. So Hooper, believe it or not, again, going back to the book for a second, in the book, Hooper dies. So Hooper dies in the book. So what happens is he goes into the cage, they put him down, the shark comes in, crashes. And remember when the shark opens up the cage and it starts sticking its nose in there? In the book, it reaches in and it chomps him and kills him. And in the script, in the movie, that's what it called for. It was going to crash in and it was going to chomp him and kill him.
So why the deviation?
Here's what happened. They realized as they're shooting this movie, you know what we need? We need some real footage of a shark in this movie. Like, we absolutely have to have, some real footage. I mean, we got this mechanical shark, and as you mentioned, you don't see it for the first half of the movie, but then when you finally do see it, you gotta you see it quite a bit, and then you realize, oh man, we got to have some real footage in here. So what they did was they Spielberg reached out to these people, Ron and Valerie Taylor in Australia. They were like these experienced shark photographers, and he hired them to take some footage of sharks. And they said, well, we need you to get a cage and put it in the water and have great whites swimming around it, but we need a person in there. Problem was, the sharks that they were shooting out in Australia weren't that big. And this shark had to be 25 feet long. So they made a small cage and they hired a little person.
My gosh.
And they put the little person in a scuba. But the funny thing is, Hollywood sends out this little person over to Australia, and it's a little person from Hollywood that's been, has been doing stand-in work for kids and rode horses and stuff like that. And they say to him, this guy, hey, we're going to put you in a scuba suit. We're going to put you in a cage down the water with a great white shark. What? So they did. But what happened was, they got some of the scenes in the movie are actually, you'll see that where a real shark is swimming around. That's a little person in a cage. But then what happened was they just kept taking other shots, and one time they put the cage down with nobody in it. And they were shooting some stuff underwater, and the great white came along. But what happened was it swam over top of the cage, and it got caught in the wires above the top of the cage, and it started panicking and started freaking out, and it started rolling around and kicking and just going crazy. And it was such great footage. Spielberg looked at it and goes, that has to be in the movie. We have to we cannot not use this footage. It's so good. So we got to put it in the movie. Problem, the cage was empty. Nobody was in the cage when the shark did that. So they rewrote the script to have Hooper escape out the cage and make it down to the bottom of the ocean. And that's how come he was able to survive. The end of the book is Brody swimming to shore. And it's at the end of the movie. Ends? Yep, at the end of the book. But in the movie, then obviously Hooper resurfaces and joins them, and the two of them kick towards shore. So some pretty clever editing on that part. Oh yeah, absolutely. And like you said, like just funny how circumstances kind of all came together in a perfect storm to make it, kind of work like that. The other thing too with the ending of the book, and the way that the script in the movie was supposed to, the end of the movie, the shark is just supposed to die from exhaustion. Just like in Moby Dick, it gets harpoons in it and just dies from exhaustion. And that's the way the book ends. And kind of boring. And Spielberg realized exactly that. He's like, you know what? That's great. That's kind of boring. We need something, a bigger moment. So that's where he had Roy Scheider put the scuba tank in its mouth and pull out a gun and shoot it and blow it up. It was like more of a big ending, because I think Spielberg's kind of thought was, hey, if I've got these people, for 2.5 hours in a movie theater, I got to give them a big ending. Like, I've got to have a huge payoff. And and so that's why he changed that part of the script and did that. So let me
ask you one question, Chris.
Of course.
Obviously, this is one of your favorite films of all time.
Absolutely.
I mean, if you look on Rotten Tomatoes, I think it has like a 98% or 99%. I haven't read a negative review of it. I personally think it's a really good film. I would give it an A, not an A+, just because I don't think I give any movies an A+, but objectively, if you could point at any criticisms or any critiques on it, or something that you wish that they would have done differently with the film, do you have anything like that you would, want to share?
I hate to say it, but no.
No?
No, it's not. It's tough to say. We talked about this off air because you were saying, where does this rank in my all-time movies? It's in the top 3. And to me, I don't think I've ever really pinned down what it is. But my top 3 movies of all time are Star Wars, Jaws, and Raiders of the Lost Ark. Probably in that order. So it's like my number 2 favorite movie of all time. As far as I'm concerned, it's perfect the way it is. I can't look at this movie and think of any scenes that I'd like that to be done differently, or this to be done differently. It's just perfect. It is perfectly done. And I know that's, I'm waxing nostalgic with this movie, but I really believe that.
But with good reason, though. It's a good film. You know what I mean? Like I said, I would give it an A. I do think it's a masterful film. The pacing, like I said, the casting, the score, everything in the first 75% of the film, I think, is absolutely perfect. I think for me, where it drags a little bit and it feels a little, like the pacing kind of suffers, is, the whole standoff with the shark, where the shark leaves and then it comes back, and then it leaves and then it comes back. You know what I mean? And after the big reveal, when you see the shark for the first time, that wow factor, that kind of, that surprise and the magic's kind of gone, basically, for me. I do think, the way that they defeat the shark and, the gruesome ways that some of these cast members die, I do think that's really effective. But it did feel a little tired to me at the very, very end of it. But like I said, that's a minor critique. I still thought it was effective, but that little bit right there would probably keep it from being like an A+ film for me, but still really, really good. And, I have to almost operate on a scale because, this film is what? I mean, I'm not a math scientist or anything, but, this film was 4 decades ago?
Yep, 42 years ago.
What they were able to do with so little back then and how effective it still is for somebody like me who's, grown up with, movies have such, like you mentioned, 10 to 15, 20 times the budget that this film did. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, I mean, it is a masterpiece. It is incredibly, incredibly effective. And actually pretty rewatchable. So I've watched it, I think, 3 times now. Once before, probably about a year and a half ago or 2 years, and then I watched it twice this week. It does have some serious rewatchability too. And
like when you talk about, I mentioned it's perfect. Like, and even some of the scenes that are just perfect. The one thing to me that's so iconic is the scene when Brody is sitting on the beach and he sees the Kittner boy get attacked. And the way it's shot, like again, you talk about non-technical ways of making movies and just being creative. They put the camera on a dolly in front of him, like on a set of tracks, and I believe they push the camera really, really closely at him very, very fast while zooming out to give it that effect where the background kind of moves and it moves in on it, and he kind of stays the same a bit, like just
almost like a tunnel vision.
Yeah, it's perfect because you wanted everything. It was like everything else goes away. It just zoomed right in on him as he sees this attack happen after he said, "Close the beaches. You got to close the beaches," and they let him keep it open. It's a perfect movie. It's perfect. I don't know. It's a perfect movie. That's my thing. So, okay. So it goes back to you. The gauntlet has been thrown down. It's back to you. So for the next show, it's in your court. What would you like to do?
I mean, I hate to say this because I mentioned this movie every single episode we record, but let's do The Matrix. Let's do it.
Let's do The Matrix because I think we're going to have 2 very different approaches on that. Me as a Gen Xer and you as a millennial. Obviously, this is right in your wheelhouse. This is a very important film for your generation. I have a different take on it. So I think that's going to be a good one. So let's come back next show and talk about The Matrix. There you go.
Let's do it.
Perfect. Yep. That makes sense to me. Okay. Well, until next time when we're going to talk about The Matrix, this is Chris McBrien for Yancy Eaton saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thank you for listening to the Pop Goes Your World podcast. Continue the conversation on Twitter at @CMcBrien or at Yancy Eaton. Please consider leaving a review for the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.